Vincent's the public sector Gender Equality Commissioner, and not only does that cover the public service, but it also covers local government. Dr. Vincent's responsible for overseeing the implementation of the 2020 Gender Equality Act and playing a key leadership role in promoting gender equality in the community and workplaces. Niki has a wealth of experience in gender equality and organisational leadership, and this includes most recently as the South Australian Commissioner of Equal Opportunity since May 2016, and also as part of the responsibility of that was general administration of the Equal Opportunity Act 1984 South Australian legislation. In her capacity as Equal Opportunity Commissioner, Niki's chaired the Australian Council of Human Rights Authorities, served on the National Management Committee of Play by the Rules, and was a member of the South Australian Northern Territory Advisory Council for the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, CEDA. She also holds an appointment as an adjunct associate professor in the University of South Australia's Business School. And in addition, she's an active ambassador for Time for Kids, which is a respite foster care organisation. Prior to her appointment as the Equal Opportunity Commissioner, Niki was also the CEO of the Leaders Institute of South Australia, as well as appointment as a member of the South Australian Remuneration Tribunal. She's also led major programs of research in previous roles, and as many of us do, she's also the mother of 4 adult children, and she has been a weekend respite foster mum for a number of years. So as many of us are, multitasking, and it's great to have you with us today, Niki, and to hear from you. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Marianne. That was a lovely introduction, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from where I'm joining you today, the Boonwurrung people of the Southeastern Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and the Aboriginal elders of any other communities who might be here today. So thanks so much for inviting me to join you for your AGM and talk about the Gender Equality Act. And I'm sure you all know about it, but so I'll just run through the basics today. It came into effect on the 31st of March, and it applies to, as Marianne said, over 300 all local councils, all 79 local councils, and all of the state's 9 universities. So all up, it covers 380,000 workers across Victoria, or 11% of the Victorian workforce. And it is one of a kind in Australia, and the legacy of many years of advocacy and policy work, and it places a positive duty on organisations to take action to promote workplace gender equality and gender equality beyond the workplace. Well, almost when we ask the community all around Australia and all around the world, in fact, whether they think gender equality is important, whether they think people of all genders should have equal rights, responsibilities and opportunities, almost no one disagrees. But too many people find their opportunities in life are limited by outdated ideas about gender, and whether this is the gender pay gap that devalues the work of women. Nationally, we know that women need to work an extra 61 days on average to earn the same as men, or an underrepresentation of women in leadership, even in female-dominated industries, or the prevalence of sexual harassment. And we've heard so much about that over the last 12 months, but it's not new. It's been going on for a very long time, and we've got a long way to go to achieve gender equality. In fact, because of COVID, the global gender gap has widened over the past 12 months, with the World Economic Forum finding that based on the current pace of change, slow change, I would have to say, it'll now take another 135.6 years to close the gender gap worldwide. I am staggered by that, and frankly, I'm not prepared to wait that long. The gender economic impacts, as I said, of COVID-19 have contributed to the backward slide, but that also means that we really need to focus on gender-sensitive responses as we recover from COVID-19. And so at an organisational level, this is a time where more than ever we should be promoting inclusive workplaces, supporting equal representation in leadership, and providing leave and flexibility for those with caring responsibilities. And that's why the Gender Equality Act is so important to driving change in Victoria, but also to set an example for the rest of Australia. I don't know about you, but as I said, I don't want to wait more than a century for organic change to bring about equality. And my team and I are determined that we won't have to wait that long in Victoria. So why do we need the Act? Well, there's still a huge pay gap, even in the public sector. So a 10.7% pay gap across the Victorian public sector, and we're expecting some updated figures soon. The gender pay gap in Australia more generally went up in the last 12 months. I'm hoping Victoria's won't, but who knows? Women make up 68% of the public sector workforce, but they are significantly overrepresented in lower paid roles. And even in leadership positions, we've got a pay gap for women in the public sector. And according to the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, the pay gap for women in leadership actually gets worse the higher up the ladder you go. There's some great reports that KPMG has done over the last decade or so on a regular basis on the economics of the gender pay gap. And they put these reports out. They're entitled She's Priced Less Reports. And I love that title. And what their results show is that the most significant component that contributes to the gender pay gap in Australia is gender discrimination. It accounts for, at the last time this was measured in 2019, it accounted for almost 40%, 39% of the gender pay gap. So if you took out discrimination, the pay gap would be almost 40% lower. And this is conscious and unconscious negative bias and rigid gender stereotyping of women in the workforce. When we think about the pay gap, we often think about caring responsibilities, children, caring for others. That is an important contributor to the pay gap at 25%, but it is blitzed by gender discrimination. Importantly, things like stereotyped gender norms and gender discrimination also influence things like industrial and occupational segregation, which together contribute to 17% of the pay gap. And that's why it's really important to target gender discrimination in legislation that has real teeth, such as the Gender Equality Act. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the fact that the obligations include a workplace gender audit across 7 key indicators: gender composition at all levels of the workforce and in governing bodies, workplace sexual harassment, recruitment and promotion practices, gendered segregation in the workforce, access to leave and flexibility, and gender pay equity or inequity or gender pay discrimination. All of that data should be, if not already collected, being collected right now and analysed right now in your councils. And once it's been analysed, you will begin the consultation process with your workplace, with your governing workforce, with your governing body, and with any union representatives. That's an obligation under the Act, to then use that data, consult about that data, to develop actions that you as an organisation will be taking to address any inequalities that you find in your organisation. Those actions go into your Gender Equality Action Plan. Once those are submitted to me and I've checked them for compliance, my team and I have checked them for compliance, you'll be required to publish those plans on your website and notify your employees and your employee representatives, and we'll be publishing them on ours as well. So when you think about those plans, all 300 plus organisations who are covered by the Act, the level of transparency, the data, the plans, the actions and strategies and so forth, which will really build a powerful and transparent evidence base for change. And then under the Act, each organisation is required to make reasonable and material progress every 2 years. And you'll report to me every 2 years on the progress that you have made in terms of the actions that you said you would do to achieve gender equality in your organisation. So it's based on what you say you are going to do to address any inequalities that you find. And we think that although the Act does have some really great teeth to drive change if necessary, I don't have to use them, because we think the transparency and the fact that this will be data that's available publicly will drive change, but it'll also drive compliance and also some healthy competition. The other obligation is to undertake gender impact assessments. So looking at all your policies and programs and services, anything that you develop from the 31st of March this year, and anything that comes up for review that has a direct and significant impact on the public must now have a gender impact assessment done on it. So it must have a gender lens put over it, thinking about how it might impact people of different genders in different ways so that it doesn't unintentionally create or reinforce existing inequalities. Ultimately, gender impact assessments are a tool to ensure that you're providing high quality and inclusive and effective services to your community. And we've got we've got about 9 case studies on our website now that you can use if you'd like some examples. One is Portland Leisure and Aquatic Centre, which undertook a gender impact assessment, and it found that while a lot of mothers brought their children to the centre for swimming lessons, they rarely swam themselves. And the next step is considering what changes can be made, and what they did was offer women concessioned entry in the afternoon when their children were at school, or after 8 p.m. when their children were in bed. And this increased attendance and participation by mothers and carers at the centre. And without a gender impact assessment, this group might have been overlooked and remain underrepresented in participation. So that's one small example. Where possible, it's also important to consider intersectionality as part of your impact assessments and also part of your workplace audit as well. And this is about factors, identity factors that intersect to make us each who we are. So not just our gender or our sex, but also our race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, disability, and any other factors. And out talking to a group of people in Wimmera last week, actually, when I say out, online, I learned so much from this group about the challenging factors and the intersectionality, the compounded discrimination caused for rural women. And so I now consider that ruralness is an intersectional with gender inequality, and we will be looking at this specifically when we get our data in. So our different identities can compound into inequality, as I said. One example is Breastscreen, actually, that used a gender impact assessment approach to develop its policy for screening trans and gender diverse people. And it conducted research, it surveyed trans and gender diverse Victorians, and it hosted a forum to inform the development of inclusive services. And as a result, they developed a policy for screening trans and gender diverse people, as well as education for their staff and tailored information for trans and gender diverse people, including recommendations on who should get breast and chest screenings and what to expect from that. And Breastscreen Victoria's mobile screening services, which services remote and regional areas, has received a Rainbow Tick accreditation for its inclusive practice. And this is a first for a breast screening service in Australia. And it means that Breastscreen Victoria is providing a much better service to its community, ensuring people don't miss out on potentially life-saving screenings. Applying a gender lens can also uncover potential gender stereotypes or assumptions that funding for capital projects benefit all people equally. For example, when Horsham Rural City Council considered a gender impact assessment on its community grants program, it found assumptions that applications from the kindergarten sector would be mainly written by women, while applications from the sports and recreation centre would be developed by committees or boards made up of mainly men. An analysis of the data by grant category also revealed that there were gendered findings. For example, within the sports and recreation category, applications submitted by men were more successful than applications submitted by women. And although there was no data to identify which gender received more funding, there was a lack of intersectional data as well, including a lack of data on LGBTIQ communities. And as a result of that impact assessment, Horsham City Council modified and updated its grants categories, and it also strengthened the grant application process to request more information about diverse groups to ensure that everyone had equal access to the programs in the community. And I'm really looking forward to hearing many more positive stories like this as councils begin implementing recommendations from gender impact assessments. So please, if you've got some success stories or learnings, or even some case studies of where it hasn't worked for you, we would love to hear about them, and we'd love to share those positive case stories on our Commission website. I know there are specific challenges in rural communities, and this can be due to occupational gender segregation that persists even as more women move into the workforce, as well as a lack of job opportunities. Those in rural Australia are much more likely to have limited access to the quality or quantity of social services or other support services of their metropolitan counterparts, whether that's childcare, education or medical facilities. And while women are also called upon for the social cohesion of a community and caring responsibilities, these unpaid contributions are often not recognised or not recognised properly. Meanwhile, women have time constraints and other barriers that limit leadership opportunities in formal decision-making roles such as local government. Gender stereotypes also contribute to inequality, including in the workplace where outdated gender norms can dictate who fulfills certain jobs and who takes on caring responsibilities. And in farming communities where tradition may be highly valued, this can also result in reluctance or resistance to change. Whether it's male-dominated industries, segregated workplaces, a lack of flexibility around caring responsibilities or workplace sexual harassment, there is a need for all workplaces to pull their socks up. In rural areas, this could mean challenging blokey culture that allows unacceptable behaviour to continue. But that cultural change is often a long, slow process requiring consistency and determination. Now, we also need to consider our unconscious bias. I know there are still some Victorians who are still coming to grips with the fact that we do actually need to take action on gender equality. And there are some who even consider it political correctness gone mad, as some commentators call it. And perhaps even more worrying than that kind of opposition is complacency through people who can't see a problem and so don't feel compelled to act. And this is understandable because if you haven't directly experienced inequality, whether it's sexual harassment or being discriminated against because of your gender or your race or whatever, then it may be completely invisible to you. Addressing conscious and unconscious bias and stereotypes is really important to achieving gender equality, and bias makes it harder for women to get hired and progress in their careers, which contributes to the gender pay gap. Women have got to send many more job applications to receive the same number of interviews compared to equally qualified men. And when selection criteria aren't given pre-assigned weights, managers often subtly shift the importance of certain selection criteria to favour certain candidates. Merit often looks like the person who was in the role before, and there's an enormous amount of research to illustrate this. There's one little piece of research that I'll talk about now. It's from Yale, where the researchers presented two hypothetical job applicants. One was male, we'll call him Michael, and one was female, we'll call her Michelle. And they were both applying for the role of police chief. The evaluation panel chose the male candidate, ranking his experience more highly, regardless of which application they were presented with. And when the experiment was repeated with the names at the top of the CVs switched over, the panel again reframed merit, the skills, the experience and attributes to favour the male applicant for this stereotypically male role. In both cases, participants thought that they were making choices based on merit, not on gender bias, but this shows how intractable unconscious bias can be. And the same applied when they reversed the situation and had a stereotypically female role. It didn't matter which application they got, as long as it had the female's name on it, they chose the female. And people often forget that merit is a social construction, and what constitutes merit is generally inherently biased towards men in male-dominated industries and in most management and leadership roles. So by asking you to conduct a workplace gender audit and look at your recruitment and promotion practices, for example, the Gender Equality Act really requires to look with a gender lens to identify any invisible bias. And right now, I'm really pleased to see great impetus and energy carrying work towards gender equality. In fact, already some entities are leading by example. Bass Coast Shire has recently announced that it will be paying superannuation on parental leave. This is also helping to close the superannuation gap, which typically leaves women worse off in the long term. And Bass Coast has also removed the distinction between primary and secondary carer, so both parents or carers can access up to 16 weeks of paid parental leave. And this is helping to break down rigid gender norms around parenting, and it also makes it easier for men to take the time to play an active role in the first year of their child's life. And this is something that I hope that all councils will consider doing down the track. Right now, though, I know many of you will have your attention focused on the first deadline of 1st of December, when your audit data is due for submission to me. And we are poised at a very exciting time, and I'm looking forward to data coming through in December and then actions plans coming through in March, and the positive progress we'll begin to be able to measure from there. So I'll leave it there, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. And if there's still time left, I'm happy to take any questions.
Niki, thanks for that. Certainly, we have got time for questions. So if people could use the hand so I can see them. Just to kick it off, I've probably got a question. What would you see as the priority? You know, you've touched on some of the things that are already occurring. What would you see as the priorities over the next couple of years, particularly for local government?
I think that there are, I mean, I wouldn't want to pick winners in any of this. I think all of those indicators that I mentioned are extremely important. And so doing something, well, I mean, really addressing, making a start on addressing any inequalities that you find in your organisations is important across the board. Undertaking those gender impact assessments and learning how to do it, making it part of business as usual is really important. You have to do these now forever while this Act exists. So there's no getting out of it. And so understanding how to do it, making it part of your business as usual, making it part of council's business as usual, both inside the workplace, but in terms of your policies, programs and services, is extremely important. There's no putting this off anymore. I guess what the Act says is that gender equality isn't a nice to have anymore, it's a must have. And so getting started on all of this, looking at your data, you know, making a start, understanding where you sit in the scheme of things on the gender equality indicators, and then thinking about what to do about addressing them. There's no one right way to go. There's no particular silver bullet that's going to kind of allow all the other things to sort of flow on. Start wherever you feel you can best start.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Niki. Any questions for Niki or comments about? It'd be interesting to hear from any councils that have been involved in some of these projects that Niki's mentioned, and what the outcomes have been to date. If anybody's happy to speak about that. Andrew Mason.
Probably not that matter, Chair, but I do have a question for Niki. Thank you for your presentation. I'm interested in your thoughts about what sort of strategies or programs could be put in place to get female candidates for non-traditional roles and in fact management leadership roles. I think an issue that we have is just getting candidates to put in an application, and sometimes that's both male and female candidates, but certainly getting candidates into non-traditional roles and leadership roles has been an issue because we just don't have applicants.
Yeah. Look, it's a systemic problem that's not going to be fixed overnight. Sometimes the pipeline, you need to address the pipeline for those traditional roles, sort of starting way back. I mean, it depends what you're talking about, where you are and so forth in terms of what I would recommend for what's available around you. But you can work with your local TAFEs and so forth if you're talking about, you know, engineering roles or trades roles and so forth. And there's a lot of work going into those things that are more traditionally male-dominated areas, in particular, trades and so forth. So you know, to try and adjust the pipeline. But I think the very basics, you need to tick off the very basics first in terms of thinking about how you have written up the job descriptions, whether you're the way that you advertise the job makes it attractive, or even the wording and the way that you word the advert for the job and the imagery that you're putting out there, all all is attractive to both genders, and is not sort of particularly leaning towards one gender or another. And a lot of organisations are really surprised when they get that analysed, because there are actually organisations that analyse this stuff now, to find that their wording needs tweaking or their imagery needs tweaking. And I think the other thing about it is, if you particularly want to get women into these roles, often it's about flexibility as well, and it's absolutely essential. The workplace, most workplaces were designed by men for men, and those were men who had wives at home, looking after the household, caring for the children, and not actually working outside of the home themselves. And of course, the world's changed dramatically now. We have seen women move into workplaces in numbers like we've never seen before. Unfortunately, we've seen no movement back the other way, with men picking up caring responsibilities. That's pretty much not shifted very much at all over the last few decades. So what we're expecting women to do is 2 jobs. If it's a senior leadership role, for example, in a rural region where there is a lack of childcare and support services, that's going to be very hard for women. So you've got to look at all the other things that sit around whatever it is that you're advertising, the expectations for the role and so forth, whether it's possible to make it flexible, job sharing, those sorts of things as well. But really have to look at all of those things on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for Niki?
Feel free to argue with me as well.
I'll make a comment. The job sharing just reminded me when I first applied for a department job. I had 4 children and I was the only district vet that was working full-time, 4 kids. And there was, Marianne might realise our local situation, the pathology lab had just closed, and we had a pathologist with all her skills and myself with my 20 years of private practice skills. We applied to job share, and we're talking 1996. And they wouldn't consider it. So they would have got 2, broad experiences. So roll on. I can't wait for this to, things have improved. And the interesting thing in the veterinary sphere now, most of the workforce is female, but a lot of the management and the businesses are managed by men. I just thinking about that while I was listening to you. That's just, things are getting better. So well done. Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. Jessie.
Thanks, Marianne, and thanks, Niki. Probably building on Andrew's comment, if you find some trends across the data, so I'm thinking in particular, there'll probably be some pretty obvious trends across segregation data. Are you looking at opportunities to address that in a wider kind of way? So, if we're finding segregation in rural councils, is there the opportunity for RCV to kind of address that trend across multiple councils or multiple,
I don't think individual councils are necessarily going to be able to do that themselves. I think there's going to need to be some collaboration, and there's going to need to be some strategies across regions, as I say, involving lots of different kind of areas. It's a really interesting challenge, and I'll be fascinated to see what comes out of the data, but also what comes out of the action plans, and where you or your organisations might come back to us and say, can you help us with this? We actually need to do this across a region or whatever. I'm really keen to see that. Obviously, I'm just one commissioner. We have 14, 15 people in our organisation, so we're tiny. So we're not intending to go out and work necessarily with across regions to do this work ourselves, but we will help set things up and help set up collaborations and communities of practice and so forth. And we're really interested to see case studies in that, where that's being done as well.
Can I just ask a question? Niki, you touched on Bass Coast and said they've decided to pay super on parental leave. Do you think that's likely to be, because obviously local government's not the only one where there's that issue about women particularly falling behind because they take time out for caring roles. Do you think is there a push to get that more broadly included in awards and the like? What's happening in that space?
Well, certainly the CPSU has it in the latest Victorian Public Sector Service EBA. So I think they get full super on their parental leave, and I think they get it on the.
Oh, you're breaking up a bit.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me or not?
Yes.
I think it's your end as well, not Niki, because I can hear her.
Okay, good. I think it's all a bit dodgy in Victoria at the moment. So yes, there is a push more generally, I would say. CPSU's already got it in the Victorian Public Service Agreement, Enterprise Bargaining Agreement, and it is something, it's happening a lot in the private sector as well. So I'm assuming it's something that the ASU is working with councils around. I can have a chat to Lisa Darmanin about that.
Just see. Any other questions from the floor or comments for Niki? If that's the case, I might just wrap it up. Niki, thank you for joining us today. I think there's some interesting things that you've said. Certainly, in terms of my council, will be interested to see the audit data that comes forward, and I think there's as you've indicated, there's some interesting case studies there, which I think are food for thought for a lot of us. Because many rural councils have a whole range of services that we provide to our community. So I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. So on behalf of rural councils, it's great to have you with us, and we'll continue to have these conversations. What's your term of office?
4 years.
Yep. Okay. So we'll look forward to talking to you again in future, and also, just to see what occurs. So thank you very much for joining us today.
For having me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. So that concludes the business of the annual general meeting today. I'd just like to thank you all for attending, and hopefully we'll be able to do this in person next year. As I said earlier, there will be information coming out about a forum early next year, which we are hoping to hold in person. And we always are interested to hear from our members about issues they have, either through your representative on the committee or direct to the committee. So thank you again. If you're taking a long weekend, enjoy it. I hope the weather's going to be kind to you, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. So thank you all very much today. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne.
Okay.
Thanks, Marianne. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Marianne. Bye.
Audio. All good.